I have people who will come to me and say, Amanda, how many times do you have sex during a week? And I'm like, that that is never going to help you. It is
Hmm.
never going to help you to know what I am doing because it doesn't matter because I am a completely different person than you are. And you need to sit down and ask yourself, how many times would I like to have sex during a week?
You're listening to Get Your Marriage On, the fun and spicy podcast bringing you new tools and fresh ideas so that you can be the sexiest couple you know.
Talking about sex with your spouse is not easy for most of us. Whether it's about preferences, desire level differences, pornography use, physical difficulties, or a number of issues, many of us find it easier just to resent our spouse rather than to see the situation clearly for what it is and take responsibility for our role in the matter. That's at the heart of this conversation I had with Amanda Ammons. You'll hear throughout this wonderful interview ideas and practical, helpful strategies on how you can discuss sexual issues with your spouse and how you can design the kind of sex life you want for yourself and for your marriage. Amanda, I am so excited that you're on the podcast today. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'd like for our listeners to get to know you a little bit better, so I thought we'd start with a little bit of foreplay. What do you say?
Sounds good.
So I want to know a funny experience that happened on your honeymoon.
Yeah. Okay. So my entire honeymoon honestly was fairly funny. So like having to narrow down to one specific moment, but I've got a really good one. So um to preface the exact situation that happened, I had Mother Nature hit partway through my honeymoon. So I was on my period and I had newlywed cystitis. And so I was dealing with some pain and all this sort of stuff. So it wasn't like fun stuff to start, but we were navigating it. But my husband and I really love to go hiking.
Uh-huh.
And so we were like, we're going to do this anyway. Like, we're going to get out there. We're going to like go have fun. And we were going to go hike up on this mountain where you could look down and see Heart Lake. And we thought, oh, that's so romantic. We'll go see Heart Lake. And so we're hiking.
Mm-hmm.
And partway up, I don't remember whose idea it was, but one of us threw out this idea of let's try to have sex on top of a mountain.
Uh-huh.
And
which is a great
was,
idea. Uh-huh.
it's a great idea unless you're dealing with pain, plus you've only had sex a handful of times, so it's still kind of we don't really know what we're doing anyway. Anyway, so nobody's behind us hiking, so we think like it's going to be totally fine. Like, we're all alone, nobody's out here with us. And we start getting to the top of the mountain, the trees start thinning, and we start thinking, okay, like, how are we actually going to do this? Let me just say that like having sex on rocks is not as romantic as you would think. We had like, we were not prepared. We didn't like bring anything to lay on or anything. And so
or
it
clean
just
up
was,
with probably.
no, nothing to clean up with. We still weren't familiar with, like, we should have brought some lubrication or figured something out maybe to help us out, just all this different stuff. And so we're literally right in the middle of this, like neither of us and really enjoying it, just laughing at the fact that like, of course we would try to do this. And we look down and we see some people hiking, and it wouldn't have been a huge deal except for they were like fast mountain hikers. And so it was like they were basically trail running up this mountain, and we are in the middle of this, like, oh my goodness. So we're like trying to throw our clothes back on and get this whole thing figured out. And they come up right over this big rock area, and they literally basically see us right as we're okay. And we're just kind of sitting there so awkward. And I don't know if they could tell. I feel like it was kind of like we looked like we were doing something a little weird. So it was pretty entertaining. It was like highs and buys, and they like just kept on hiking past us, and we just laughed. We're like, I don't know that this is I don't know that we're gonna try this again.
Mm-hmm. That is so funny. That's so funny. A lot of what we learn in marriage and relationships that make us better, unfortunately, comes from our mistakes, not from our successes. Like, failure is a really good teacher in life, as much as we hate failure, right? Like, what are some of
Yeah.
like the failures you've had as trying to navigate, sex in your marriage that you've learned?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the big ones is my husband and I pretty much talk about everything. And we've always been that way where um, we're very out in the open. And there's controversy of whether or not you should, talk to your partner about every lusting situation or like what all you've done with people in the past. But for him and I, from the very beginning, we were both like, no, I want you to know everything. I want you to be on the inside. And that was really, really, it was good intentions, but it wasn't played out well because a lot of times what would happen, especially when we were engaged and we were like, okay, I'm going to tell you everything. Like we have to figure out how this is going to work. We would basically kind of almost dump it on each other and just like, all right, here's this heavy thing that we have to deal with. And it would be months worth of just that was the topic that kept coming up all the time. And we would just keep working and working and working through it. And we wouldn't always make a lot of progress until it was really like after we got married, we started seeing, okay, these conversations are really, really good for us to have. Like, I want you to come to me and I want to be able to come to you, but we've got to set some healthy parameters here. We've got to set some boundaries. I can't just have you come interrupt me in the middle of whatever I'm doing and tell me like, hey, something popped up on my computer screen or whatever. Um, so we learned one of the biggest things early on was to assess ourselves before we went into the conversation, because a lot of times we would come and not like to each other and not be ready to, we wanted to just kind of like, I guess, rely on the other person to be there and support when we weren't like being healthy ourselves. And so
Gotcha.
I would, yeah,
It's like
yes,
it's like imagine you and your spouse. This is like just a metaphor, but in order to stand up, you had to always lean on each other. So you're like constantly walking like an A-frame, right? In order
yeah,
to be
yeah,
balanced, you require the other person to prop you up and vice versa.
yeah,
And that seems like what it was like early in your marriage. Like I needed you to kind of help prop me up. And what you're saying is, no, we should kind of stand on our own feet first before we
yes,
come into each other.
exactly. And something that we learned, and I was kind of the first to come across this, but a lot of times when you're coming to each other with something that you feel like you need to talk about. So, for example, for me, I felt like my husband wasn't being very romantic with me. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I want you to be more romantic. Like, why isn't this a part? Like, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you talking to me? Like, we should talk more. We should have more conversation. And something that someone told me once was before you ever go to somebody with that thing that you feel like they're not doing for you, ask yourself whether or not you're doing it for yourself. Am I actually like having healthy mental conversations with myself? Do I feel romantic in and of myself? Do I bring that to the table? And more often than not, it was like if we wanted something from our spouse, it was like we weren't actually giving that to ourselves. So my husband wanted affirmation. It's
Uh-huh.
because he wasn't affirming himself.
Yeah.
And
You look to your
so,
spouse to kind of fill a leaking bucket. When it's only
yeah,
your job to fill it, but you hope someone else fills it for you.
yeah, yeah. Or to have God fill it and like to stop and assess and say, like, I feel like I have a need. And yes, my partner can play a part in that. They can help, like, we can be healthy together. But before I ever just go, like, here's my problem, here's what I need, here's what's happening, like, stop for a second.
Uh-huh.
Have you actually processed it yourself? Or are you just running to say the next thing to them that you feel like you need to say?
Gotcha. So, is it easier to go through life hoping your spouse fills your needs, or is it easier to fill them yourself in the moment?
I mean, it's definitely easier. It is emotionally easier to just want your partner to
Right.
do
That's
it.
why we do it.
Yeah,
Because it takes
because
work
then
to do it ourselves.
exactly. Well, and then if we don't do it ourselves, like if our partner doesn't do it, we go, oh, it's their fault that I don't have this thing. We have someone that we feel like we can blame, that we can
Yes.
pin it on them or whatever. But when it's ourselves, we just have to turn around and like own up to ourselves and be like, oh, it's my own fault. And that is so much harder.
Yeah, because we don't want to face ourselves. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. This is the concept I teach my men's coaching program a lot. This very thing you're
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah. I love that.
So
Yeah. And then the other,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the other thing that we learned kind of with that is if you want to be healthy going into difficult conversations, you really need to set the expectations up beforehand and talk to them about, like, instead of just going into a conversation like, hey, I know you've been dealing with porn and I see this and this is like whatever, to stop ahead of time and say, I want to have this discussion with you. Are you ready? And this is what I would like it to look like. I would like it to start with us being in love and us ending in love. I would like it to start with a hug and end with a kiss. I would like for me to talk and then you to talk, and just learning to, like, I don't know why sometimes we just jump into conversations. I think it's just we have stuff bubbling up in us. But if you are stopping and setting the expectations, difficult sexual conversations go so much smoother when you have a plan.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, definitely. I can think of several conversations we've had that have not gone well is because we didn't set those parameters up front. Or one person in the relationships ruminating on this for weeks and weeks and weeks, and finally has the courage to bring it up, but it sprung on the other person. So they're unprepared to talk about it, while the first person had weeks to think of and prepare for it. So you do kind of need to go into it together.
Yeah. And for me, I found that if we didn't like have an end in plan, then we would talk about this difficult conversation and then I would just like, we would move on to whatever was happening in life instead of like fully putting a stop to that conversation. And I would just keep bringing it up, keep like sneaking in like passive aggressive comments, or he would make little quips or whatever towards me. And it was because we hadn't like, this is the start of this conversation and this is the end of this conversation. And when we move forward, it's not going to invade everything else that we are doing. Like, we're going to leave it here and we can readdress later if we need.
Great. How important is it in your conversations as to where you put your focus? Because sometimes it's easy to put the focus on, like, you're the one with the problem. You're the one that's not stepping up.
Yep.
You're the one that's versus like, what am I dealing with here? Like, tell me more insights on that.
Yeah, my husband was actually the first to kind of teach me that. And it was really, really hard because I wanted to say you all the time. And he started asking me to say, can you say I feel or I think or the way I see it is? And initially, I did not want to do that because I tend to be more of a person who is like, things are right or wrong. They're black or white. This is what's happening. And this is, if I see it, that must be the way that it's happening. And it was hard for me to contemplate the fact that someone else might have a different perspective on the exact same situation. Or there might be something else going on with my husband that, you know, he didn't voice, or the way that he did something came out wrong or whatever. And so, yeah, I just had to learn to like, okay, this is again about me. Like, I need to assess myself first before ever coming to this conversation. And if it is something that he is dealing with, it's his job to talk about where he's at, not my job to talk about where he's at. I should say what I feel, not what he feels.
I like that. It's about the locus. Where are you putting the locus of control? Is it within you?
Yeah.
Which is the only way. We'd like to think that we have a whole lot more control in life and in our relationships than we really do, but we really don't.
Yeah.
We can't control our spouse. We can't control the weather. We can't control just things, although we think we can, but we really can't. The only person that we really do have control is ourselves. This reminds me,
Yeah.
like, this happened in my marriage recently. I went away on a trip, and before we left on a trip, we usually like to have sex before we go, just as a connecting thing. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
We're just tired, kids busy, just things weren't working out. And we're gone, and we're just itching for each other. So like my wife and I like to do, we flirt over text messaging, and we can't wait to see each other. My flight was like the last flight of the night arriving. We get home, and there's just so much to catch up on that she wanted to tell me, and I want to tell her. We went to bed. We weren't sexual that night. Next day, hoping things would happen, but we ended up just napping instead of really connecting sexually. And then next morning, nothing. And then the next morning, I'm like, I am going crazy here. I really want sexual connection. And just because the schedule wasn't working out. So we had the world record fastest quickie in the world. And it wasn't fulfilling. And it's so that particular day, my wife dropped me off at work because she needed the car. And it's so easy for me to, like, I'm kind of upset here. Like, it's been a long time and you're not available. You're always too tired. You're always too involved. Like, I can always like make it her problem, but that's not going to get us anywhere. So the conversation, instead, I tried really hard, like, calm myself down first and really look at the situation as it is and admit, we've both been tired. We've both been busy. There's a lot been going on. And I probably should not have asked for that quickie, knowing it was going to be, it just was really unfulfilling for both of us, like, for that moment. Instead, but it was on me. So I had to admit, like, the move I made probably was not the best move. And that's never easy to admit, but that's the only way you can move conversations forward, when you put the locus of control back on yourself. Like, how am I participating in this? And of course, we could have made something work Sunday afternoon, but I was trying to be the nice guy, thinking if she's really happy and taken care of, she would have, like, absolutely no reason in the world not to jump my bones. But that's a fantasy I live in too. Like, if she's really happy with me, she'll, like, be so eager to have sex with me. But that's not the way our relationship works. There has to be someone that initiates. So
yes. Yeah. I had to learn that a lot with my husband, because I feel like a lot of people's dream is that the other person would just read, like, what you want or what you need, or they would just understand you so well that they would know exactly what to do in every single moment. And
even if they do, like, they're not robots. Even if they know you want sex, that's not going to be what they will do.
Yes, exactly. And I had to learn to get really, really good to tell my husband exactly what I needed. And he's so thankful for it all the time, because there will be times where we are having, like, a difficult conversation, or we're having a great time in sex or whatever it is, and he'll kind of freeze, and it's like he just doesn't know how to move forward. And I'll be standing there or whatever, and I'm like, okay, this is where you hug me now. So like, this is where, or when I'm telling you all these things, Caleb, I'm literally saying, I just need you to say, Amanda, I love you so much. And he's like, oh, good, that's right.
Thanks for the cue.
Oh, yes, exactly. Amanda, I love you so much. And I've had people be like, do you feel like that just takes away from it because you're, telling him what you need so much, or like you're kind of, I'm not making him do anything. It's more just that those are the things that he doesn't think in the moment. His brain is going 100 miles an hour, and he's like, I don't know what is the next move that I want to make. But for me, I'm like, it doesn't take away from that at all. I get exactly what I need in that moment. And my husband means it still just as much, even though I was the one who said, hey, I would like you to kiss me. Hey, I really am just trying to hint at you. I would like sex. So can we go do that?
Yeah, I love that. I had a guest on the podcast a little while ago who kind of elaborated on that a bit. Instead of saying, "How come you don't kiss me?" or "How come you're not kissing me?" or like, "What's wrong with
Yeah.
you? How come you don't get that you're supposed to kiss me now?" Like that was a language she used to use with her
Yeah.
husband. And instead is like, "It would feel so wonderful right now if you would kiss me." Like it's more
Yeah.
like expressing like a desire than it is like a demand. That was like the
Yeah. And
difference. Uh-huh.
that's back on the you thing, like taking ownership of it would feel good to me instead of why aren't you?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Another thing, Amanda, you talk about is like designing your sex life. I want to hear more about that.
Yes. I think this is probably my favorite thing to talk about.
Uh-huh.
I feel like I come from a culture where everyone is trying to grow. Everyone is doing a lot of self development. People are trying to make areas of their lives better. And for me, examples are I really love just getting my girls' homeschooling plan laid out. I love designing my house. I love learning how to cook and bake better. Even things like I love learning how to clean better and getting educated on just all these different areas. How do you sleep and how do you eat and how do you work out? And it is so interesting to me that I will have conversations with people where I bring up, what have you learned? Like, what new thing have you learned for your sex life? And that is never, ever something that they think about.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sitting here like, man, I journal about that kind of stuff. Like, I think I will take time where I will just sit in my bed and with my journal, and I'm a journaling person. So that's,
Uh-huh.
one of the benefits for it. But I will sit there and I will think, if I were to just think of what I think God wants for my sex life or what I want for my sex life, what would it look like spiritually? What would
Mm-hmm.
it look like physically? What would it look like mentally? What would it look like emotionally? What would it look like for me? How would I want my husband to feel from it? And I take time to make sure all those things line up, that the physical, emotional, and mental and all of that line up, and really invest in that. And when I talk to some people, it's like they're just awed by this fact that I never thought that I could make it whatever I wanted it to be.
Uh-huh.
I never thought that I could design it like I designed my house, that I could sit down and think, I would like to have this, whatever, this sex toy or this kind of lube, or I would like this kind of foreplay, or I would like to have, for example, for my husband and I, like a worship time leading into it. We love to worship and then have sex because we feel like it is integrated. We feel like it's something together. And people are mind blown by that. But I think that if they were to sit down themselves and process through who they are, their own individual personality, their relationship, things that they love, what would sex look like? It wouldn't look like anything that you see in movies or in the world. It would look so unique as they are. And I don't know. I love it so much.
Designing it, because if you don't, nothing happens in life without like a thought that accompanies it first. Like no one had the
Yeah.
idea to climb Mount Everest without like believing it's possible and envisioning how that to be done, or to the moon or whatever it might be. Right. I
Yeah.
think same with our sex lives, is that's which is a really important part of our lives. Our sexuality is just as much us as it is how we are a physical person and an emotional person.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
be
exactly.
deliberate, be proactive about it, and like design what kind of sex life you want.
Yeah, and think through who you are and what makes you unique, because sex doesn't just have to be in the bedroom, and it doesn't have to be in just one way. And so I know people who it's like they love being outside, and the best place that they have sex with their spouse is outside.
On a
And I'm like,
mountain.
that's yeah, they might make it work. I'm not probably trying it again, but it's like, what makes it unique to you? Because it it should be special and it should be unique. And I have people who will come to me and say, Amanda, how many times do you have sex during a week? And I'm like, that that is never going to help you. It is
Mm-hmm.
never going to help you to know what I am doing, because it doesn't matter, because I am a completely different person than you are. And you need to sit down and ask yourself, how many times would I like to have sex during the week? How many times would my partner, and have that sort of conversation? I think we want easy answers, and really that's not going to get us anywhere. But actually taking the time to intentionally put some effort into planning our own sex life will do so much more for us.
There's going to be listeners to this that are like, okay, Amanda, I know what you're saying. I agree with it, but I absolutely have no idea where to even start or even think about what I want for my sex life. Like, I don't even know where to begin. What's your advice for them?
Well, my primary advice would be I have a design your sex life packet.
Okay.
So just a video series where I help walk people through that, because it can be really hard. And I think unless you are used to journaling, or you're used to taking that sort of time to yourself to mentally process those things, it can be difficult. If you are not a journaling person, I would recommend just setting aside specific time with your spouse to just open up the floor and have sort of a creative brainstorming session,
Mm-hmm.
and not bringing in just set the expectation you're not going to bring any disappointments or hurts or pains into that conversation, because that's not the purpose of it, though those things still need to be dealt with. When you're designing moving forward in your sex life, take time to really just ask yourself, um, for me personally, I would sit there and say, okay, in the world, like everything that I'm doing, who am I? I'm a mom. I'm a podcaster. I'm a counselor in training. I love baking. I love hiking. I love gardening. And then incorporate sex into that, and see where that leads, because a lot of times we try to separate it out to what sex should look like just on its own, but it's really a part of you. It is not this separate thing that you have to set off to the side and be like, oh yeah, it's its own category. No, like it all goes together. And so see what it looks like to bring sex into that perspective of yourself, and kind of just make a plan moving forward from there.
One exercise I've done is I set a timer for like 10 or 12 minutes, and I had a pad of paper and a pen. And like, I'm just going to write, just don't lift my pen. I'm just going to write what my sexuality wants, and no filter. I try not to filter or self-edit. I just kind of just let it all out there, knowing I can throw away and burn this paper after if I need to. But just
Yeah.
really, because sometimes we don't give our sexual self a voice. We suppress it too
Yeah.
much, or we filter and edit it
Yes.
way too much. And I can see how that would be difficult to do. And so for some people in a brainstorming session with their spouse, because with seeing their spouse, staring back at them, you're going to do a whole lot more
Yeah.
self-editing. And that this piece of you, this voice of you, is not going to have an opportunity to speak. So set a timer for 10 minutes, and I just write. And it was surprising to me how much came out. It's like, I was really surprised, like, oh, not that I'm ashamed of things, but like, these are things that I probably won't share out loud, or like, again, it's that self-edit that goes on so much, but like, yeah, this is really an integral part of me. And it was also insightful. Like, I learned a lot from that. And then I got the courage to kind of clean up my notes and type it up, and share it with my spouse. And with the premise, like, I just want you to know who I am and what's in me.
Yeah.
And I don't expect any of these things like actually happen per se, because this is a relationship, but like, just the mere fact of sharing that with someone was a big act of courage for me in that moment.
Yeah. I had an act of courage like that, but it was it was way different. So it was my sex class for counseling in college, and I adored this professor so much, but he had a couple of us come stand up, and this was probably, I don't know, in front of, it was more than 50 people. And I volunteered. I don't know why, but I volunteered, and I come down to the front, and he has me standing there in front of posters that are sexual. And he's snapping his fingers, and he's saying, I want you to say a word that comes to your mind about sex every time that I snap. And I was like, okay. But it reminds me of what you're talking about, just like this writing and and just keep going and just brain dump it out. Because there was a lot that came out that I wasn't expecting, like words that I said. And every time he snapped, I was saying something new. And so, yeah, I teach that a little bit in my Passionate Beginnings course, but that exact concept of like, okay, don't stop, like try to get as much out about it as you can, because whatever you wrote down, good or bad, is all something that you can work with moving forward. And you can either heal it or use it and make it better. Yeah.
In your marriage, you're the higher desire spouse, and that's about 30-ish%, depending on what study you read, or where the wife is the higher desire. Yet I get emails from a lot of wives who are the higher desire spouse thinking they're really alone. I just want to normalize the conversation a little bit. And I just want to know, what's your experience like being the higher desire spouse in your marriage, and any advice you'd give to other wives who feel like, if they're, I don't want them to think they're broken or weird or anything. It's just like, what encouragement can you give to other higher desire spouses, wives?
Yeah, for sure. So initially for me, it was difficult because I wondered if I had a problem because I would be around a bunch of other wives, and a lot of their conversation was just complaining about it and complaining like, oh, he wants it all the time. And I'm just so tired and all these sorts of things. And I was sitting here silently, like, I feel the exact opposite. I want it like all the time. And I have to convince my husband to climb into bed with me. And so I thought, is this something where, do I have basically a sexual addiction? Do I have a problem? Is my brain different? Am I weird? And I come to realize that, and I don't know necessarily how all of it plays out, but I think for me, I was having really, really good sex, and I was really connected with my husband, and I was really healthy, and I wanted it for good reasons. It was enjoyable. And it also, for me, I have found that my trigger is stress. And so when I am high stressed, some women, their stress makes them have lower libido, and they're like, I can't handle this right now. It's one more thing. For me, when I am stressed, I'm like, okay, I need something. I need anything. I need sex. I need to like relax. I need to orgasm, because I am just pent up and this just needs to happen. And so I came to realize that it obviously definitely was not a sexual addiction. I did not have a problem. I was not different. I was not crazy or whatever. And it was a blessing that I was able to just walk away from it and say, God made me this way with purpose. And it's a blessing to my husband in the way that I am. And it makes me not better or worse than any other woman. It makes me unique, exactly the way that God made me.
I like that. That's really good. If people want to learn more about what you do, your courses, your podcast, where do they reach out to you?
Instagram. I love connecting with people on Instagram. So it's Amanda Ammons _ and I'll give that to you. But yeah.
Great. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Get Your Marriage On. And if you did, we would love it if you would take a few seconds to give us a rating on iTunes and to share the show with your friends. They'll thank you for life. Once you've done that, you can head over to getyourmarriageon.com for more resources about today's topic and to download our amazing marriage apps. Now go get your marriage on.